There you go. Good morning there, sir. Good
Good morning,
morning.
Dr. Sherri. How are you today?
I'm very good, Daniel. So nice to have you on with This Week with Dr. T this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited about chatting with you today about the subject I'm pretty passionate about. So let's go. Let's have fun today and chat about interesting stuff.
Okay. Well, first question is, where are you located? Where are you joining us from this morning?
I'm in Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where our company lies. And I'm transmitting out of St. Pete, which is a cloudy day today, by the way.
By the way, yeah, we have a lot. I just did. I don't know if you heard me say at the top of the hour, two interviews this last week with Anthony Sabatini, and he's in the Orlando area and he's running for Congress. And I've been following him on Twitter for quite a while, and we need his type of people up there in D.C. to help officially go back and get rid of the swamp. In fact, I've told him, I said, we need 400 more of you across the country running. We really need that. So tell us, you said you're pretty passionate about this. So why don't we just start with something really simple, like what is EMF radiation and how does it affect us biologically?
Electromagnetic radiation has been around us for 100 years. Electromagnetic radiation is emissions from the electronics we have around us. And as a byproduct of electricity running through wires, there's an emission coming out of the wires themselves that are electromagnetic radiation. And we began listening to radio 75 years ago. And there is a signal in the air that connects our radio to a cell tower, and that's electromagnetic radiation. And then all of a sudden, 10, 15 years ago, we had these cell phones that started appearing. As you remember, they were big bricks, and they were really heavy to carry. And if you had one at that time, you had no friends to call because they couldn't afford those very large cell phones. So
I remember that.
Yeah, right. Like I had no one to call. So we had this in our environment, but think about it, over the last 10 years or so, all these devices have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and we have it in our top pocket. The mainframe I used in Bell Labs is now literally the processing capacity of a cell phone. It's like unbelievable power in a tiny little box. And the laptops and the radios. And it's the radio frequency signals, the RF, from our cell phone to a cell tower that's making a connection. Can be as much as 5 miles away. Well, that's got to be energy that's being transmitted a pretty far distance. Wi-Fi, when you have a Wi-Fi in your house, you have a tablet and it's connected to your router. That goes 500 feet. There's energy that's being transmitted between those devices. And those devices are very close to us now. I mean, when I use a cell phone, I use it to my head like most people. And where before I had no friends to call, I can spend hours at a time. So what is electromagnetic radiation? Think of it that there's a little transmission coming out of my finger. And it's growing, 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 growing. It's omnidirectional. It goes in all directions within the room, escapes the room, goes through brick walls, and it goes to your cell tower. Well, that's going through your head too. The standards today allow us, was defined by a 6-foot male that was mature, an adult male, and the standard established, we're going to make sure that if a cell phone is used to the head, it can only penetrate that head by 1 to 2 inches. An adult 6-foot male, mature cranium, a lot of hair, all sorts of stuff that interferes with the signal going into the head. That was over 30 years ago that was created, right? And if you think about it, what happens when it's a female skull? maybe a teenager's female skull. Wonder if it's a child's skull, 6 years old.
Or
That
younger.
yeah, or younger. That 1.6 watts per kilogram, that's the power level of a cell phone, can go right through a child's head. So that's why I'm passionate about it. The standards were really old. Technology is advanced far beyond where the standards protected us. And we're on it for hours at a time. Maybe it's a mixture of circumstances that actually endangers the health of the individual. And we have lots of knowledge about what that is.
Well, what are some of those things? I mean, I understand that. In fact, it's one of the difficulties that I have getting my head around a lot of things with the EMF and the 5G, which I want to really talk about in a few minutes. But is because if I do all of these things to shield me, but I walk outside or I live in an apartment and my next door neighbor is above, below me, and beside of me, they don't do anything to shield anything.
Right.
What can you really do to kind of protect yourself from that?
So let's talk a little bit about what are the symptoms, as you just asked,
Yeah.
and then our environment and where does the dangers lie within that environment to have, so the influence of that RF signal into the body. Okay, so we have neurological problems related to electromagnetic radiation, physiological problems. Your hands
What would
can
be what would be some of the neurological things? No, just what would some of the neurological be? Just kind of drill down a little bit for us.
So if you're electric hypersensitive and you have a cell phone constantly to your head, or for that matter, you're ambient, the room you're in and has high levels of electromagnetic radiation, you may have foggy thinking going on. You can't quite think about what's going on in your head because the signals around you are literally interfering. And for the electric hypersensitive, it can get really bad to the point where the brainwave pattern of the brain literally is disrupted. And I have a Dr. Porter I work with. He has ways of taking a person that's walking and has brainwaves that are sleep pattern brainwaves and shifting that around. So you could literally have body malfunction essentially, where you're walking while you're sleeping in the brain and you're sleeping while you're walking. So it can be that extreme. The environment we live in, well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mentioned to you about the distance, right? You put it 1 to 2 inches to your head, you put it on your head, and that's where there's the most danger. Believe it or not, almost 98% of that danger is gone if you're 4 foot away or so. So simply distancing yourself from these transmit sources is a way of actually reducing the dangers to your body. And if you're fastidious about it, you get your routers far, far away from you. You get your tablets turned off when you're not using them. Your cell phone, a cell phone has 3 transmitters, a Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and a cell phone connection transmission. Do you use Bluetooth? Do you use Wi-Fi? I don't have Bluetooth or Wi-Fi on my phone. So I take my cell phone, which has 3 transmitters, and make it 1, and I move it farther away. Another thing that's very, very easy to do is limit time. When you have a cell phone to your head for 5 minutes, you'll live forever. If you have it for hours at a time, after 10 years, it's 3 times more likely to have frontal lobe cancer. So it's that serious. Heavy duty use can really change the biological infrastructure of the body.
Why do you think it is that, because I've seen a few patients in my practice in my office in Cleveland that are EMF sensitive. I mean, and that they just feel buzzy and their ears ring and they just really can't function. Why do you think that some people are more sensitive than others?
It's exposure. The more exposure you have, starting from childhood, in vitro, There is research that shows ADHD, autistic children are influenced with a cell phone in the back pocket of the woman's womb. And so you're actually being influenced at the earliest of ages, and most of us are okay. But believe it or not, 15 to 20% of the entire population is electric hypersensitive. You talked about headaches and tension and stress and all those kinds of things. 15 to 20%, and it is growing. And the reason why is because of the environment we're finding ourselves with. And by the way, Dr. Sherri, do you know 80% of that group is women? Science doesn't know why women are more susceptible. It could be mineral breakdown. It could be hormonal. It could be brain pattern, brain differences. Clinics speculate on what the actual difference is and why, but no one really knows.
Okay, that's interesting because
because you're a clinician, and I'm confident you know when people talk about oxidative stress. You know, oxidative stress is free radicals, the balance between free radicals and antioxidants in your body. That's a simplistic, very simplistic way of looking at it. I'll give you an example. When you go outside and there's pollen in the air, what happens? The histamines in your body converge on those areas of your body that's being exposed. Guess what? Histamines are being distributed in those who are electro hypersensitive as well. That's referred to as cell danger response. The cell itself is saying, stop hitting me. And what happens, it doesn't pass the proteins across, it doesn't do all kinds of things a healthy cell should do. And that's where it starts breaking down and system function breaks down. Like you were talking about tendonitis, balance is influenced, and that's neurological as well as physical. And so there's a lot of things that are going on as a result of these exposures.
And go back and say that quote again. You said if someone had a cell phone to their head, you just said 3 hours a day, it increased their risk of brain cancer. What was that statistic you said?
Okay, so it's if you're a heavy user, we know that heavy users are 2 to 3 hours a day. And over a 10-year period, you are 3 times more likely to have frontal lobe cancer than an average person who uses it less.
Wow.
If you're living within a cell tower, 1,000 feet of a cell tower, you're 3 times more likely to get a cancer. Just because the transmitted signal is so high and it's influencing the body. Think about this, Dr. Sherri, you know, and I sort of mentioned it before. It's a toxin in our environment, right? A toxin that hasn't existed very long. As I talked about, it's not been close to us. And all of a sudden, it's hitting us. And the body's saying, oh no, what should I do now? I've never really seen that. So the hereditary protection that you typically evolve doesn't exist as of yet because we haven't had it in an environment that long.
Wow. You know, I think about that sometimes when I see parents, you know, they've got little kids in a stroller and the little kid's holding the cell phone right here watching whatever little video, you know, what that's happening. You know, I think about all the radiation that we do to babies in utero, like all the repeated ultrasounds. You know, mom, you know, puts her cell phone on her belly, you know, when she's sitting there, you know, watching a video or something. And I also remember, this was several years ago, I was at a conference and they were talking about taking a cell phone. People would go out and they'd be jogging and they'd put their cell phone, and particularly women, and they would put it inside their bra at the top, and they would go out to do exercising and things like that. And they were seeing these really unusual types of breast cancers that were developing in the breast. And they were and it was in an unusual area because, you know, breast cancer is usually upper outer quadrant, and here it was on the inner area and kind of high.
Right.
And breast cancers are
Right.
either upper outer quadrant and into the armpit, or on the lower side of your breast. And somebody really smart, and they were punctuated. So instead of like a cancer like this, you'd see little spots of
Right.
cancer. And somebody
Right.
actually did the research and said, wow, it's probably EMF stimulation of putting your cell phone constantly inside of your bra, you know, for men. And I think that in men, we're ending up with testicular cancers by carrying their cell phone in their front pockets. So, you know, these organ tissues are really sensitive to that.
Yeah, there's no question whatsoever. I want to go back to a comment you made about in vitro. When my son and I wrote the book, Dr. Powell is an individual, a biochemist, physicist, PhD biochemist in the Northwest. And he talks about the cell breakdown because of the membrane of the cell being penetrated with calcium and destroying and you mutating or damaging DNA, damaging the cells. And so we talk about that in the book a little bit. So we there is that research science that says, you know, this can be pretty serious if it's really closed for a really long time. So in your back pocket, you're a teenage girl. Your egg is influenced by the transmission from your cell phone. And then 15 years later, she has a baby. And she potentially has these DNA damaged cancerous cells, potentially. So Dr. Prasad, who is the world-renowned expert in radiology, he said, you know, Dan, I'm not sure I agree with you. And I said, okay, you know, Dr. Powell and others in research think it's true. I'm not sure it's true. And then he had a woman come into his clinic. She was mid-20s, late 20s, used technology all around her every day. And guess what? She had become pregnant and lost a child almost immediately with very strange cancers, very uncharacteristic cancer, 3 sigma case cancer, simultaneously. And he called me up and he said, you know, you may be right. That is a woman who had technology around her.
Wow. Well, we're getting to the bottom of our hour here already. The time just flies so fast when you're talking to somebody really, really interesting. So I want to just, for all the additional people, we've got hundreds and hundreds of people that have joined us. I want to just tell everybody that we're talking this morning with Daniel DeBon, who's the inventor and CEO of DefenderShield, the most effective EMF radiation protective technology for all of these devices. And I wanted to say, you know, you sent me one of your headsets, which I use on my laptop, but it doesn't fit on my cell phone, and that's why I've got these little danglies on.
Oh, no.
Because my iPhone has a flat connector, and the one that you sent me for my laptop has a spiky connector. So the good news is that most of the...
Go get a dongle, and it'll work fine.
Yeah, so I've tried to do that. I've got one of those adapters, but it doesn't sound right. And so I don't know, it's probably just my phone. But anyways, I want you to talk a little bit about why this type with these air tubes, because I'll have to make it, I'll tell you, I never, ever, ever, ever put my cell phone up to my head, ever. I either, if I have it and I don't happen to have one of, you know, some sort of a thing, I'll put it on speaker and just hold it. It's off to the side. I never put it up to my head because it gives me like an instant headache. And so for years, I've never done that. I know this isn't so this is a little bit better, but this is best. So I want you to talk a little bit about these air tubes and what DefenderShield is all about.
So it turns out that when you have a cell phone to the head, that's the worst case you can have. And when you put it in your hand and speakerphone, that's maybe some of the best you can have, but everyone else can hear you. So to avoid that, you go with wired headsets, the kind you have on right now, and that's better than hitting the head. by 2-3 times. It's pretty good for you. But we're somewhat of purists, and we know that electric hypersensitive get even the little electronics coming off of those little devices bother people. So what I did was I took a speaker and I put it down into the wiring that doesn't come close to the sensitive parts of the body, and I convert it to an acoustical signal, and then it goes to the ear. It's acoustical. It has no electromagnetic radiation characteristics whatsoever. So you're safe. And we literally bought it for women, particularly because that's the 80% who had problems putting stuff close to their heads. It was real. I mean, to the point where, we have become electric hypersensitive experts because they go to most physicians and the physicians don't know that these transmissions can affect the body.
I think I just remember. I think I just saw just recently. Isn't there just some big class action lawsuit that's starting about EMF against? I don't remember if it's the telephone companies or maybe the tower companies about lying and hiding the hazards behind this and not doing that.
Dr. Sherri, there's no question about it. There's beginning to be pop-ups of communities rebelling against it. And that's really a good thing. What's also true is that the FCC, that was the instrumental decision maker for all of us, decided that the standard 35 years ago is fine. Well, it turns out that a whole lot of researchers, Robert Kennedy, and Dr. Deborah Davis, they actually brought lawsuits against the FCC and said there's a preponderance of biological understanding that's not reflected in the standards that were established on a 6-foot male 35 years ago. And so, you ignored science. And so they brought it to the Supreme Court, and 2 months ago or so, the Supreme Court said, in their oral arguments, one of the judges said, tell me why I shouldn't rule against you, because it's clear you didn't use facts based on science to make your choice. It was amazing what they did, right? So there's this groundswell of things starting. 5G is the real trigger of all this in so many ways, which is really good. But at the same time, it's going to take years. And
of course. It's like all of these things, they take forever.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Tell us a little bit, talk a little bit more specifically, because I really want to cover this with you. I was looking forward to having this conversation with you about the issue of 5G and the 5G rollout. And I have a really good friend that lives in Switzerland that he's kind of my go-to guy about 5G things. And he's been telling me China's now moving to 6G. And I've seen that documentary that talks about, the exponential amount, like when you go to 3G to 4G to 5G in terms of radiation. Talk to us a little bit this morning about the 5G and what's going on with that and our health concerns, because there's many people who feel like this whole COVID nonsense really wasn't having much to do with a virus, or if it had anything to do with some sort of a viral genetic piece, it was activated and made exponentially stronger in the presence of these places where they had 5G.
Okay, complicated question, but I'd love to answer it. It turns out that we haven't talked about this yet, but there's immune suppression, blood-brain barrier suppression when you're using devices. When it's immune, it's gut. And so there is a fact where electromagnetic radiation influences the biome. Some biome loves the electromagnetic radiation more than others, so it propagates more quickly. It doesn't create virus. It doesn't create bacteria. in your biome. And so this was linked to COVID, and there is no link whatsoever to the immune system, although we know electromagnetic radiation is influencing biome. And by the way, I mentioned to you before about the head, and we know there is protocol for helping those who are electromagnetic radiation sensitive. They go to the biome too. There are characteristic virus that propagate more in the electrohypersensitive. And so here you go. There is no correlation with COVID. Let's
Really?
talk about
For 5G,
5G.
you don't think there's any connection at all
No.
to making people sicker
No.
or any of those things? Wow, now that's really interesting.
No, I get, it really frustrates me because they don't know science when they talk about the. In fact, when you talk about the gut, there's 10 times more bugs in your gut than cells in your body. And you're right. There's a lot of influence that occurs, but it doesn't create virus. There is no correlation whatsoever. Are you more susceptible to virus? The answer is yes, because immune is being suppressed. And so it's unclear what the direct correlation of how more susceptible are you when your immune is suppressed. So those are some of the facts. Now, with 5G, when we talk about a transmitted, a cell phone transmission, we talk about it in terms of hertz. 1 hertz is 1 cycle in 1 second. Cell phones operate at roughly 1 gigahertz, 1 billion cycles per second. In other words, if over 1 second, 1 billion cycles will occur. And that's what the preponderance transmission is today. Radio is lower than that. But by and large, Wi-Fi goes up to 5 gigahertz. So it's as high as 5 gigahertz. So that's what's been in our environment all along. 5G comes along, and guess what? Most of what you know about, that you hear about, is within the 10 or below gigahertz space. And so what we know is there is influence from electromagnetic radiation to your cell in your body. We already know that at that level, and we could only suggest, researchers would suggest, there may be more of that, but nothing has been introduced so much in our environment that change it. Now, here's the big difference. When you have the high bandwidth that's going to be transmitted to your house, or it's your business and they don't want to run wires, they run 23 gigahertz. They run 60 gigahertz. And as you had implied, when you talk about 5G, 5th generation, that is standards up to 300 gigahertz. So we know for sure that there is allocation of bandwidth where they can go up to 300. Why is that important? Well, Dr. Sherri, it's never existed in our environment before, ever. It's not been in the commercial space. It's not been in the residential space, ever. So the fact is, we know nothing about these millimeter waves, and they're scary. And here are 2 instances. At 20 gigahertz, I've seen some research, and it says your bugs in your stomach like it. So it's more of the same, maybe even accelerating the certain bacteria and virus that may be good, may not be good. But it wasn't statistically significant because it was only 1 study. When you and I were in college, we were protesting, as you may remember, and rather than using water on us when we were in college, they all of a sudden had this newfangled thing. It was a machine that focused electromagnetic radiation to us for crowd control. That is a 90 gigahertz signal. What we know is that 90 gigahertz, the sweat glands in your body resonate at 90 gigahertz. And so the reason why you and me ran was because it was an antenna for 90 gigahertz and it was getting us really hot. So it's used in military applications and so on for crowd control and military reasons. So we know there is.
So that 90 gigahertz, we know that, but didn't you just say something about this cumulative effect of 5G towers is 300 gigahertz?
Can get it in the next several years. It's going to be up to 300 gigahertz.
Wow.
And by the way, you made an important point a minute ago. You said 6G. 6G is up to 900 gigahertz.
Wow.
Why? Interesting. Well, when you get up to that speed, almost a terahertz speed, guess what? X-rays are not far from that.
Wow.
So we're talking about very invasive, very potentially invasive transmissions at 6G that had never existed in our environment. And we know all those higher rates have been potentially lethal to those who are exposed to X-ray. When you're going to the dentist and they put this big heavy thing on top of you, and then they run into the other room and push a button and it goes zzz in the room, that's a terahertz signal X-raying your mouth, and they run in the other room because they don't want to be hit with it. In other words, we know it's concerning, and there's a lot of caution about those high rates. But here we go, 5G is coming at 6G, and we are beginning to approach the terahertz space.
So what about the effect of 5G on the environment? You know, I've read a lot about the effect of 5G on bees and how it causes them to be, they can't find their way home, they can't find their way back to the hives. And I heard an interview, well, it was just sort of like a spontaneous Instagram live from a friend of mine yesterday, Renette Senham, that was talking about that suddenly they just blasted up another satellite that have all these 5G things that are showering down, and all the bees and all the hummingbirds just are suddenly gone out of her garden. You know, what's the effect of the electromagnetic frequencies on bees and things like that?
I have an associate, Dr. Ali Johansson out of Sweden, and he explains when you have a cell phone in the room and you have ants around them with babies, the ants literally pick up the babies and walk away. We know there's an influence on natural environments. We know that for sure. There's been a lot of research. The bees reference, we see more and more and more cases in which literally, I gave a presentation a year or two ago, and I took pictures of a 5G 23 gigahertz transmitter killing all the bees that were around it. It is influencing with their biome, or their biological infrastructure, their migration structure, all of those kinds of things that are influencing us are influencing them. And there's no question. But Dr. Sherri, not one real substantive study has ever been done. So when we see this, as you know, you can't conclude that's the fact without more study. And unfortunately, this has never existed in our environment. There's no study whatsoever on these rates.
Oh, what you're saying is that it's not that there's no studies showing that there's disruption, but there's no studies showing the extent of the disruption. You know, right. that we do know, both from studies that have been done and from anecdotal evidence of like beekeepers and places like that, we do know that it's causing a problem. because we see it, but the powers that be are not going to put money into studying it because you can't find what you're not looking for, and you're not going to invest in a study to get a result that you don't want to have. If I am
That's
interpreting
exactly
that
right, Sherri.
correctly, yeah,
Right. You know, when
yeah.
I talk about electromagnetic radiation, I often talk about there's there's a lot of, I mean, thousands and thousands of research studies over the last 2 years. There's an extraordinary amount of data. Not any one of them are statistically significant. In other words, the populations weren't large enough until a few years ago. National Toxicity Program, which was in the federal government, were asked by the FCC to study 4G. They looked at it. They had 10,000 subjects, rats, mice, and they found 2 responses: frontal lobe tumor, cancerous, statistically significant now because it had 10,000 patients. And then you look at the heart. The heart was shown to have disruption, statistically significant change. And then a year later, out of Italy, the Ramazzani Institute, which is a collection of researchers throughout Europe, they literally came up with the same conclusions. So your epidemiology was pointing to the problem, but it's not human. And that's the argument. It's not human, can't be true. What, are you kidding me? The study has been used for 100 years before we research with humans. And the cells themselves are not that far away from a human response. At least in epidemiology, that's what the conclusion.
I think I want to restate what you said to make it a little bit more clear. So what you're saying is that the research is out there. It's been done. It shows the harm of the EMF. It shows it in mice and rats and probably monkeys and all these other things. But the powers that be are saying that there's not enough research. It goes back to the argument almost like climate change, right? We need more science.
Yeah.
Or with vaccines. Vaccines are safe and effective, but we need more science. And so to me, it's sort of like, where do we draw the line and say, we've got this enormous body of information that shows that EMFs are causing harm to humans, to brains, to our dogs, to our kids. But yet, the money people, the AT&Ts of the world, the Baby Bells, the big Amazons, the big Googles, everybody that wants you attached to all these things all day long are saying, oh, it's not statistically significant, or the study in the human beings wasn't large enough numbers of people, or you didn't follow it for long enough periods of time. So what I think you're saying is that there's a ton of research out there, but the people that could do something about it are ignoring the research, just like the safe and effective thing on vaccines. And so it's going to be up to we, the people, to do 2 things. Number one, we need to figure out these technologies to protect ourselves. And number 2, to support people like Children's Health Defense that just filed the big lawsuit about the 5G towers. And Dr. Davis, who's for years has been trying to say this is causing cancer, and to really so it's just like so many other things in our world about vaccines, about COVID, about all this other stuff. It's never going to be a top down. Oh, sorry guys, we harmed you. We're going to make it right. It's going to be up to us from the bottom to do what we can to protect ourselves. So in the last few minutes, is that correct? Am I restating that correctly?
Dr. Sherri, exactly so. It turns out this is what the phenomena is. The FDA wants to review a subject, a product, whatever they choose to use. They have to go to an industry that are experts in that space. They take industry experts from the very people they're trying to protect,
right?
That are factoring, right? And they come into the
it's like
FDA
the fox minding the hen house, right?
Right. That's literally what happened in the telecom space. In the telecom space, there was one person who approved 5G. He was 30 years ago, the managing individual for the cell phone industry, and then he became the governance of that industry when he passed 5G.
Wow.
And it's the same
And we
business
see,
model.
yeah, we see it over and over and over and over again. So the last couple of minutes that we have here this morning, Daniel, this has just been great. And this is exactly what people need to hear, that we know these things are causing harm. The body of evidence is huge. The powers that be, we've got, you know, the monsters minding the hen house. It's sort of like when, you know, the head of the CDC went and became, you know, Julie Gerberding. I always refer to her as Julie Gerberding Dong. That she went from being the head of the CDC for 8 years over to the head of Merck Vaccines International. And it's that revolving door, and it's not just in the vaccine industry. It's in this industry, the telecom, the EMF industry. It's in the climate change industry. It's in agriculture. It's everywhere. And so it's this big fascist society that we have. So in the last few minutes that we have here, talk to us a little bit about DefenderShield and the products that you have, and where we can get them, and why it's important for us to at least take care of our space, and what we can do about that.
Dr. Sherri, it turns out we started DefenderShield 10 years ago. My wife, my boys were visiting me. My wife says the laptop in my boy's lap was dangerous. And I said, nonsense. I worked for Bell. I developed the standards for this stuff. There's no way that's true. Then I went into the research side. After about 3 to 4 hours, 25% of the male sperm is immobile or disrupted.
Wow.
We knew it 10 years ago. And I said, you know what? We're not victims. I'm going to build you some. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. And so I built a laptop protection for my sons. And then we began more and more involved, and I had to become more and more knowledgeable of the industry. And then I listened to a family that just lost a 6-year-old child that was 1 year with a cell phone that their parents didn't want to give. Anecdotal story, died of frontal lobe cancer. And I said, I can shield that. I know I can shield that. And I built products around that. And I've been doing that ever since. We built products to protect the body. It's not perfect, but it's not a perfect environment we live in. And you try to do the best you can. You're the architect of your own destiny. You're the one who has to decide what you have to do in your environment to make sure you're safe. Our products are at DefenderShield.com or Amazon. On DefenderShield.com, it turns out that we have a whole learning section. We spend a lot of time trying to help people understand the problem. We link all the studies. So if you want to find the facts, go in and you'll see all the links to ADHD. We talked about it. The sperm count in men. We have all that breakdown so people can read it and then make their own judgment. So DefenderShield.com is where you can find information.
That's awesome. And so that just goes back to what we were just talking about a minute ago, that there is, I mean, all this research is there. We're never going to get the powers that be to pay attention because it's about money, power, control, and actually, quite frankly, depopulation of the planet. You know, we used to talk about depopulation in sort of a whispered tone behind closed doors with only a certain few sets of friends that you thought might be on the same page as you. But now it's become so blatantly obvious of what they're trying to do to humanity. And 5G, 6G, EMFs, just frequencies, you know, are just a part of the program. And like what you said about the sperm count, like lowering the sperm count. I mean, all the vaccines that people get, I mean, Chris Exley is the big aluminum expert who I just really like a lot. I mean, he did a study a few years ago now, maybe 15 or 16, where he looked at 62 men, and he had got semen specimens from 16 men. And what he found was there was a direct correlation to the higher the amount of aluminum in the semen specimen, the lower the sperm motility. And the one man that had the highest concentration of aluminum had a sperm motility count of 0. So you couple in the aluminum in the body, and then aluminum is a metal, so it vibrates. So now we add in EMFs and 5Gs. We make that sort of vibration connection. And now we add in, genetically modified food and glyphosate from Roundup and all of the additives in our foods. I'm telling you what, to me, it's a pretty amazing thing that any human stays alive at all today. It really does.
Hey, Dr. Sherri, I love the fact you talked about aluminum, and I'll tell you why. When you're in a cell danger response, and it's a very complex space, but when you're in cell danger response, you don't flush minerals, and it congests.
Wow. You
It
mean metals?
congests.
You don't? Did you?
Yeah,
did you mean metals?
The minerals, they all congest in the center of the body, and there's a high level of toxicity that occurs as a result of that. And so when you're electric hypersensitive, that's one of the functions that are going on. The system says, I'm not discarding those things that shouldn't be in here anymore. I'm just going to try to protect myself. It's a stay or flight response. It's a flight response. It's a natural body response your body's doing, and we're contaminating it with all the things that break that protection we've had for millions of years.
Exactly. Wow. Well, Daniel, I want to thank you so much this morning for this Instagram Live. This is very informative, and people need to know that 5G problems are real, EMF problems are real. The younger the child, the younger the problem, the more, or the younger the person, and the more exposures that you get. And whatever you guys do, if the one thing you take away from this morning is don't put your cell phones next to your head. and get these amazing. Listen, I'm going to have Michelle go back and get, because I've tried those adapters and they just really don't work. So I need to get, where you plug, it just doesn't work. I need to get another one of these, because this one that comes from you, the DefenderShield one that I have, it sits into my computer. And so when I'm doing lives or I'm doing conversations or I'm having lots of phone calls, I'm using my cell phone. But when I'm not, I'm on my laptop, because then I'm usually listening to my Spotify account, or I'm listening to Bard's FM in the background or something like that, to just do that. And so I am grateful for this. And I can tell you guys, I can really tell a difference between these, which after a few hours, I get a headache. With these, I can have these on all day and I don't get a headache at all. I really don't. Right. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that.
Are you multiply chemically sensitive?
No, I'm not.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
80%, 95 to 100% of those who are electromagnetic hypersensitive are multiply chemically sensitive as well. Believe it or not. There you go.
Well, it's like, I think that has to do with detoxification pathways and, keeping your lymphatics open and keeping your liver and your kidney and your skin healthy, and all the things. So this morning, because Instagram cuts us off in an hour here, Daniel, so I don't want to lose this live. So I want to thank everybody who joined us here this morning, and Daniel DeBon. Go to DefenderShield, look at the products, listen to the research, get some things to start protecting you. So these are really important. And so go to DefenderShield.com and do that. And so I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. And as we close out, I want to say a special thanks to everybody who comes here on Monday morning for This Week with Dr. T. We do leave these on Instagram Live for as long as they're going to be there, but we also peel them off and we put them into the Tenpenny Files, which is the name of my podcast. You can find it very quickly by just going to drtenpenny.com. And while you're there, while you're on drtenpenny.com, looking at the podcast, because the more of you guys that sign up for the podcast and the more of you guys that start following us over there on Podbean, we'll stop doing these lives on Instagram and we will do them on Podbean. So because they don't censor us, and they put, they've really been supportive of the things that we're doing. So go over and follow us on Podbean. And so with that, and while you're there, sign up for our email list, because we never know how much longer we're going to be on these platforms. So we think that's very, very much. So, and with that, I want to close with one of and I close every one of my episodes like this. And with that, I want to close with one of my favorite verses from the Bible, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. So until the next time, stay strong, lean in. All of you guys have an absolutely magnificent day. Share this with all your friends and your family. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.